Okay, here we have the equipment and ingredients that I'm going to need to make mozzarella cheese out of the fresh goat's milk that we have. We of course have the goat's milk, and each one of these mason jars is a half gallon, so I've got 1.5 gallons of milk. Then you need some rennet, which is a enzyme complex that is gotten from the stomach of ruminant animals, young ruminant animals. Those are ruminants, are things that eat grass. And what that does when you add it to the milk is it breaks it apart into the curds and the whey, the curds being the solid part that you actually make the cheese out of. Then we have citric acid, which is necessary for making mozzarella. It causes the cheese to become stretchy. Then I've got a stainless steel pot here that I'm going to be using. Got some measuring spoons. I have a 1/4 cup of water in a measuring cup, and strainers. Okay, making cheese, from my experience so far, is pretty easy. You just have to be able to measure and use the proper amount of each one of the ingredients. I am making mozzarella cheese, and each kind of cheese that you make has a little different method. So the first thing that we're going to do is empty the jars of milk, each one of these being a half gallon, into my stainless steel pot. And you want the milk to be about room temperature before you begin mixing in the ingredients. One thing about having a home dairy operation is that you create a lot of dishes. Okay, so I have the milk in my pot, and now we have to wait for it to come up to room temperature. One thing that I forgot to say in the beginning, which should go without mentioning, but I should say it, is that all of your equipment, your stuff that you're using to touch the ingredients, needs to be clean, because you don't want to introduce any foreign bacterias that are going to mess your cheese making up into your stuff. So anyway, once the milk has reached room temperature, you're going to add the citric acid, which lowers the pH of the milk, and it's not put into all cheeses, but in particular mozzarella cheese needs it, and it does something, it affects the composition of the cheese, is what gives mozzarella its stretchy nature, elastic. And there's recipes on the internet for how you do this and how much of whatever the citric acid that you need to use. And for the amount of milk that I have, which is 1.5 gallons, I need to have 2 teaspoons of citric acid. And I'll show you what it looks like. Hopefully you can see that. It's just a white powder. It kind of looks like salt. So I'm going to put my 2 teaspoons into the measuring cup that has 3/4 of a cup of water in it. And then I'm going to stir it up so that the citric acid gets dissolved. Okay, it looks pretty well dissolved. Got myself a spoon here, or a kind of a wooden paddle shaped tool, and I'm going to stir that into the milk very slowly, stirring it while I do it so that it gets dispersed throughout the milk evenly. Okay. Then, after that, that, the next step is to put the pot onto the stove and heat it slowly to 90 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and put it over there. Another tool I forgot to mention a moment ago is a thermometer to be able to tell how hot things are getting, regulate the temperature. Okay, now I have my pot of milk on the burner and the flame is set to about medium low, and you want to heat your milk slowly to between 90 and 92 degrees. And doing it slowly is important. You don't want to rush it because you want to gradually heat it. And I'm going to stir it and use my thermometer to measure the temperature, keep tabs on how I'm doing. And you don't have to stir it continuously, but you just need to keep milk circulating so the heat is evenly distributed. This should take about 20 or 25 minutes. So okay, the milk has been heated to about 90 degrees, and after that point you turn the heat off and add the rennet. And once again, there are lots of recipes on the internet. They vary a little bit, but for what I am doing, making this mozzarella, the recipe I'm following calls for 8 drops of rennet per 1 gallon of milk. Since I have 1.5 gallons, I'm adding 12 drops, which is probably about 1/2 a teaspoon, and I already measured that out so that I could just go ahead and put it into. It's not very much, it's just a little tiny amount of rennet. And that is the enzyme that causes the proteins to separate in the milk, and it makes the curd separate from the whey. So the curd is the solid part that you turn into the cheese, and the whey is the liquid that is left over, which can also be used for all sorts of things. Now that I've added the rennet, what we're going to do is put the lid on the pot and leave it covered. I'm going to set it just over here in the middle of my stove because you want it to kind of stay at that 90-degree temperature. And then we've got some other stuff over here for the dogs cooking. Our dogs are spoiled. We cook food for them. Anyway, so that is going to probably keep it kind of warm over here, and it'll keep my pot warm without heating it. And you let that sit for around 15 minutes is what they say, but basically what you're going to look for is when you take the lid off after a while, you'll see the curds start to form, and it'll be up at the top with the liquid underneath. And so we just got to wait now, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, it has been about an hour since I left this milk with the ingredients added to make cheese on the stove. And previously I said 15 minutes, but that's not always the case. You should let your real guide to when it's ready be to check it. And my hands are clean. I'm poking it, and there's a solid curd. It's not sticking to my finger, floating on top of the whey. So the next step now is to take a nice sharp knife, and cut the curd, being very gentle and easy here, into basically squares, cubes. I'm going to keep doing that, and then I'll show you what that looks like whenever I'm done. Okay, I have cut the curd into pieces, and I'm using a slotted spoon here to try to show you what those pieces look like. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're just dividing them up, and then you let it rest again for about 5 minutes and these pieces that you have cut are supposed to kind of get more firm, and then we'll move on to what's next. As you can see, I have turned the heat back on underneath the pot that I have my cheese making operation going on in. And this is after I have cut it into cubes and let it rest for about 5 minutes. And what we're going to do now is heat this to about 105 degrees. Right now it's just hovering under 100 degrees. You want to do this slowly too. My heat is on sort of medium low, and you want to make sure that it doesn't go over 110 degrees, because then you would be cooking the curd. What this does, heating it again before you proceed, it kind of gets more of the whey out of the curd, so it makes your curd more solid, more firm. Okay, right now I'm still heating the curd up to about 105 degrees, and I'm doing it slowly, so it's taking a little while. Being careful to monitor this so that it doesn't go above 110 degrees, very important, because you don't want to cook the curd, you just want to heat it, which causes more of the whey, the liquid, to be removed from the curd. What I'd like to talk about while I'm waiting for this to warm up is that I think it matters the kind of milk that you use to do this. Dave and I, of course, are using fresh goat's milk from our goats to make our cheese. Supposedly you can use store-bought milk, but you would definitely want to stay away from the skim and low-fat varieties, which have had a lot of stuff taken out of them. And in fact, even the full whole milk at the store is not ideal because it's been pasteurized, and the heating process really kills or destroys a lot of the enzymes and good bacteria, the components in the milk. It messes that up, and so heating milk to high temperatures, while this is done for these large commercial dairies for sanitation reasons, and I imagine it's because it's impossible, they're working on such a large scale, it's impossible for them to keep it entirely clean and sanitary. I'm sure they do their best, and they've got protocols that they follow, and of course they're cleaning and stuff, but on that large of a scale, you're taking milk from hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of cows, and it's all mixed together, and who knows what it encountered before it got to the processing place. And so to be on the safe side, I guess, they heat it and pasteurize it. But if you can access milk that's fresh and has not had that process done to it, it's going to be way better. And personally, I would stay away from the low fat and skim milk stuff altogether. I would never drink that stuff. There's plenty of information on the internet if you want to dig more into that, why that sort of thing is not really healthy for you. But I have made all my cheese with our goat's milk. I have never made cheese using any store-bought milk. So this is 100% whole milk, unpasteurized, straight from the goat, just a few steps out the door. And it works. But if you don't have access to a goat or milk, fresh milk from a goat or a cow, what I'm saying here is that you can do this using milk that you get from the store. I've read that it's better if you can try to find milk in the store that is closer to its normal state. I guess they do sell it, organic milk, and I assume they even have low heat pasteurized milk, they call it, where they don't heat it to a super high temperature. Anyway, just wanted to go over that. Still waiting here for the for it to heat up to 105 degrees. Almost there, I think so. Alright, turning the fire off. And we're gonna get ready to do the next thing. Okay, now we're moving on to the next step after I heated the pot, the stuff in the pot to 110 degrees. And I realize I may be chopping my head off in this video, but it's more important I want to show you what I'm doing versus like looking at me. So anyway, now comes into play your two pieces of equipment here, the strainer, and I've got another large stainless steel pot in the sink that I'm going to drain the whey into. And what I'm trying to accomplish here is just separate the curds, which is going to become the cheese, from the liquid, which is the whey. And a lot of people on the internet use a slotted spoon and they spoon the pieces out, and that takes a really long time. So what I do is I use this, it's a mesh strainer, and my hands. So we're going to go ahead and get going on that. You just kind of want to be gentle with it because you don't want to break your curds up more than you have to. And you can let some of the whey drain through the strainer or the spoon or whatever you're using to get it out of there. That's good. And I put that into the other colander strainer. I think this batch turned out really nice. It's already got that sort of stretchy, rubbery, elastic consistency that characteristic of mozzarella. This can get kind of messy. Got most of the bigger parts of this out. I'm just going to move this for a moment and set it into the sink. And what I'm going to do now is pour the rest of the contents of the pot through this strainer. Get out the little pieces. Not that much left in there, see? It's a little bit stuck to the bottom of the pot. There we go, though. We've pretty much got the curd, the solid part, in there, and then there's the whey in the pot beneath. Now, some people just let this sit and kind of drain, and I kind of help it along to speed it up. I'm just kind of massaging the curd a little. What you're wanting to do is get more of the whey out. Maybe you can hear it. The liquid is draining through the colander into the pot beneath. You can even kind of squeeze it, kind of work it into a ball in your hand. Squeeze that liquid out of it. The more whey you get out of your curd, the more dense your cheese, your end product's going to be. Still has a surprising amount of liquid. See, when I squeeze that, the whey just is squeezed out like it's a sponge. We keep the whey. It's good for all sorts of things. Dave uses it to make bread. We use it in cooking. Some people will, like you would cook pasta or couscous or something like that with chicken broth. You can do the same thing with whey. Just use that in place of water to cook things that you need to cook that way with some sort of liquid, and it adds flavor, and I'm pretty sure it's pretty good for you. Alright, I'm going to let that sit for a few moments and some of where the whey will drain out, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, now I'm going to start with the really messy part, and if I had a microwave, I would use that. Well, I wouldn't because I don't do microwaves, but people on the internet will tell you you can use a microwave to do this and save yourself the trouble of what I'm about to do. But you have to heat your curd to get more of the whey to separate from it. And to do that without a microwave, what you need is a pot of hot water about 170 degrees, and then you break off little round pieces of your whey, or the curd, and you dip it into the hot water. Then you squeeze it. You have to squeeze, and this can get really messy. So here we go. Normally I wear rubber gloves, but my rubber gloves, I use them to dye some fabric, and I don't have another pair of rubber gloves, and I don't want to use the ones that I used for that dyeing because I think there's residue on it. So I've got a slotted spoon. I'm going to use that to kind of help me out here, and I've got my piece of curd. I'm putting it into the hot water, and we're going to let that heat up for a moment. I've got the fire on underneath this pot. I heated it to about 170 degrees, and then I backed the fire down, just trying to maintain that temperature. Anything hotter than that, and you start to cook the curd too quickly, and also it's very, very hot and will burn your fingers. Okay, here we go. Dave usually does this part because he's got great big monkey hands, and I do not. I've got little bitty wimpy hands. Oh, and it's very hot, but I'm really tough, so I'm gonna tough it out here. And then what I'm doing is I'm squeezing it, and I just squeeze it right over the pot, and all of that whey drips off into it, and your water goes from clear to looking like milk. Sometimes you may find that you need to freshen your water up, change it out if it gets too much. We don't ever do that though. You squeeze it, keep squeezing it and working it. This part is time consuming and a lot of exercise for your hands. The water and the whey that comes out of it, even though it's in this pot, it's not gonna soak back into the curd, so you don't have to worry about that. Maybe a tiny little bit on the very outside. Ooh, it's hot. And you I squeeze it in a ball, and I also sort of knead it like bread. And really, I think you can do this as little or as much as you want to. The more you do it, the more whey you're going to get out of it, and the more like mozzarella that you're familiar with in the store it's going to get. You can see maybe there that it's already starting to get kind of elastic like mozzarella. And we generally don't go to the extreme because it doesn't really matter to us if our mozzarella has the perfect mozzarella consistency. It still tastes good. Ooh, so hot. See, it's getting a lot more as you go along. The more you do this, up to a point, the stretchier and more and smoother. It becomes smoother also. Like kind of like it gets to the consistency of like saltwater taffy. There's a lot less whey coming out of the curd now, and it's really starting to get it's getting smooth and shiny looking. If you were doing this in a microwave, the way I understand it, people put it into a bowl and then they heat it, and there's better instructions on the internet for how long to heat it, at what temperature setting, etc. And they take it out, you know, after each session of being microwaved, and they just do essentially the same thing that I'm doing. You squeeze it and then you drain the whey that comes out of it off, and look at that, it's really getting nice now. Mozzarella. It's very good. Anyway, I think this piece right here is good enough for me. And I still have an entire bowl, so you can see how long this takes. That's probably the most difficult part about making the cheese, is just taking the time that's required to do this. So we're going to keep on working on this. I think I'm going to switch up and let Dave with the big monkey paws take over. I sampled some of the first bit that came out. It's very good. It has no salt or anything added. One of the nice things about doing stuff like this yourself is you can really control how much salt that you put into your cheese. I know a lot of the salt from the store, sometimes to me, it almost seems too salty. And a lot of times Dave and I don't even add any salt. We just leave it totally plain, and our opinion is that it tastes just wonderful that way. But a lot of times I do add a little bit of salt. I'm probably going to add a little bit of pink Himalayan salt to this. You want to be really careful when you salt your cheese. You don't want to add too much. You can always add more, but just add it like in little tiny amounts. Otherwise, once you go too far, you can't go back. So you can see Dave's got bigger hands than me, so he can grab a more sizable chunk off and do it at one time than I'm able to. It goes a little faster for him. Here is the end result. A ball of mozzarella cheese, fresh, made from goat's milk. As you'll recall, this was 1.5 gallons of milk, and from that we were able to get 26 ounces of mozzarella cheese. And we have quite a bit of whey, the liquid portion that we'll be using for cooking and baking. So, yep, cheese.